Yesterday, King Charles addressed a packed House chamber, becoming only the second British monarch to do so after his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. The King spoke about the shared democratic values binding the two nations, even in moments of disagreement.
Our two countries have always found ways to come together. And by Jove, Mr. Speaker, when we have found that way to agree, what great change is brought about, not just for the benefit of our peoples, but of all peoples. This, I believe, is the special ingredient in our relationship. As President Trump himself observed during his state visit to Britain last autumn, the bond of kinship and identity between America and the United Kingdom is priceless and eternal.
Priceless and eternal. Well, last night, the state dinner at the White House brought a more relaxed atmosphere. Both King Charles and President Trump made jokes about shared history between the two countries. The leaders, the Queen and the First Lady, exchanged gifts. You know, political and constitutional historian Dr. Nigel Fletcher joins us now. Sir, it was so fascinating to watch, especially when we saw that bell presented. Which moments from yesterday stood out to you, and what do you think is most significant?
Well, yes, I think both speeches were notable, but the address to Congress, I think, really was much more impressive than we were expecting it to be. We knew the King was going to be having to walk a very delicate line between being polite to his host and delivering some messages that will perhaps have been uncomfortable for President Trump to hear. But I have to say, I thought that he would stick with the historical, and we would hear the sort of the old chestnuts of the sort of historical relationship between the United States and the UK. We got a lot of that, but we got a lot more humour and a lot more directness, I think, from the King in his remarks. The fact that he mentioned NATO, he mentioned Ukraine, and the section particularly that struck me as a constitutional historian was the section on Magna Carta. There was a very direct statement there about checks on executive power, which received a very enthusiastic response in some parts of the chamber, but must have been quite difficult, I think, for President Trump to hear.
Well, and after that, let's talk about the state dinner, because President Trump, if we're trying to see how he received the words, he actually said King Charles aligns with the United States position that Iran should not possess a nuclear weapon. Take a listen to that, and then we'll talk about it.
And we're doing a little Middle East work right now, too, if you might know. And we're doing very well. We have militarily defeated that particular opponent, and we're never going to let that opponent ever. Charles agrees with me, even more than I do. We're never going to let that opponent have a nuclear weapon. They know that, and they've known it right now very powerfully.
I heard on the radio this morning one of the British lords say that that is the place where the United States and the UK are solidly aligned, and that's making sure Iran never has a nuclear weapon. The UK, NATO, both oppose the nuclear weapons part of this, but also we do know that the UK has not been desirable to draw themselves in to this conflict. What do you think the next chapter is?
Yes, I mean, that was a bit of a slip. I mean, you could see the British delegation almost sort of wincing at that moment. It's quite possible, I think, that the King may have indicated agreement with President Trump on that particular point. As you say, that's not really the point of disagreement between the two governments at the moment. They're disagreeing on the military action that President Trump is taking. But, you know, we cooperated with the United States in achieving the deal that was supposed to stop Iran pursuing its nuclear program some years ago. So that's not a point of contention particularly. What I think will have struck the British delegation as a bit off message was the fact that those private discussions between the President and the King are not supposed to be revealed, but also the King is not a political figure, so anything that he might agree with or say in private is not something that is speaking on behalf of the government in that way. But I think it was a minor aside from the President. It could have been a lot worse, but that speech, both speeches actually by the President and by the King at the state dinner were much more light-hearted, and I think it was quite good tactics on the part of the King to make his serious points in Congress and then to perhaps make a more light-hearted speech in the evening at the state dinner, flattering Trump more overtly and giving him the gift that he gave him. But I think there was perhaps a note of warning, because the president began his remarks by saying that he was rather envious that the king had managed to get so much applause in Congress. And I think sometimes somebody else getting more applause than him can be a dangerous thing with this president. I think there was perhaps a little bit of an edge to that, although he said it in quite a light-hearted way. I think when it is perhaps explained to him, or whether he realises quite what some of the subtexts meant in the King's remarks, and why it was that those Democrats got to their feet so enthusiastically at parts of the speech, he might not perhaps look on it quite as fondly as he was in the evening.
Dr. Nigel Fletcher, thank you so much. Great conversation.